right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to MedCom Benefit Solutions Desktop Discussions. This Thursday, April 23rd, can you believe it is almost the end of the month already? It seems like a crazy whirlwind since all of this started, but we are thankful for your contributions to our desktop discussions, your questions, your attendance. I am once again joined by Michelle Barkey, our Senior Legal Counsel, and she is here to answer our questions again today. So welcome, Michelle.
Thank you, Casey.
Once again, go ahead and mute yourself so we can cut down on that background noise. And with that being said, we will go ahead and get started. All right, our first question today. Can you please confirm that if anyone does elect to suspend their dependent care election, would they still have to contribute their full election amount for the year? Meaning the remainder of their contributions for the year would be higher to meet their elected amount.
Casey, this is not necessarily true. The IRS has indicated that DCAP rules are a lot more relaxed than the FSA rules. One thing to remember is, unlike FSAs, the significant cost change rule can apply to DCAP. Elections can be increased or decreased with the change of cost of care. We have certainly seen now with the coronavirus a decrease in the cost of care because the daycares are closing. Therefore, the costs can also be reduced and the contributions can be reduced. When daycare opens back up, they could increase the contributions again. This is not really a revocation or a suspension of the DCAP election, but rather it's an increase or decrease in the contributions. The IRS has informally commented on the breadth of allowable changes for DCAP elections under the changing cost of coverage events. For an example, the IRS officials have said that an election change may be permitted if a child is switched from a paid provider to free care, i.e. with a neighbor or relative, or no care, i.e. that there is now a latchkey child. IRS has also indicated that an election change should be permissible whenever there is a change in provider. This was an actual question that was once posed to the IRS. Is a significant curtailment of coverage rule broad enough to say that if any time you change a dependent care provider, there should be an election change allowable? And the IRS said yes. We have said as long as the employee actually switches providers, an election change is allowable. For an example, it could be that the employee has sent their child to a daycare center, and now a relative is available to watch that child. However, I do want to caution everyone that that is what the IRS allows. What the employer allows may be different. So you always have to review the plan document to see whether or not mid-year election changes are excluded for DCAP. The plan document review is always the second step in the review process. Casey, back to you.
All right, thank you. What would happen if they have already used some of the funds in their FSA? Is it optional for us to allow them to suspend their elections, or is it mandatory for us that they have this choice?
FSA rules are completely different than DCAP rules in regards to mid-year election changes. And actually with FSAs, the mid-year election changes are very limited and very strict. Mid-year election changes are typically only allowed if there's a change in family situation, i.e. marriage, divorce, or mid-year election changes can also happen by plan design. For example, if the plan indicates that the FSA is terminated, if the employee is terminated, goes part-time, or is furloughed, it would then be for all the employees equally situated, and it is not by the employee's choice, but by the plan design. At that point, if the FSA is underspent and the employee would have a COBRA option. However, if the plan does not specify that termination occurs if there is reduction of hours or leave other than FMLA, then the FSA election change cannot be changed. It's not by employee choice because of situations. The IRS has also said that a pay cut is not a reason to change an FSA election. And we know that by Notice 201454, I believe it, 55, when the IRS said that if someone went from full-time to part-time, when they were in a stability period or in a mini-measurement period, they could change the healthcare election. They specifically excluded the FSA. So FSA elections are kind of locked in stone, and mid-year changes are not typically allowed. To date, the IRS has not made any further rules to account for any changes with the FSA in regards to the coronavirus. There is always a risk if employees are able to choose as to whether or not they want to choose their election. And any employer that chooses to bend the rules in any way should be prepared to demonstrate that all the actions were taken in the best interest of the participants, were certainly not designed to circumvent the payment of owed taxes, and were applied in a fair and equal non-discriminatory way, and were certainly reasonable. This will always certainly help to ensure the best possibility of success, though there's no guarantee, in the event that there's a participant complaint or the IRS challenges the employee's decision.
Thank you, Michelle. Are individuals able to suspend their elections for their FSA? Would they still be able to contribute their full amount for the year as the funds are front-loaded at the beginning of the year?
Yeah, again, the FSA elections cannot typically be changed except in rare situations mid-year. But one of the things we see is the FMLA rules, and they're kind of interesting because if someone is on family medical leave, the employee is allowed to suspend the coverage and not make contributions when they are on FMLA. The same, though, also holds true for the claims. If they're not paying the benefits, then all claims for that period are also suspended. When they come back from FMLA, the employee can either pay catch-up with the contributions and have the full amount of their initial election, or they can just continue the contributions they had before, which would reduce the total election amount. We have not had any confirmation from the IRS that this is permissible for employees who are now on an unpaid leave or anything related to the coronavirus. But it would be one example to follow if the employer chooses at this time to take the risk and bend the current rules.
That makes complete sense. Would any of these situations be a problem for their Section 125 plan?
As indicated above, yes, there could be an issue with their Section 125 plan. FSA mid-year elections are very rare in what is permitted. We believe this year the IRS will probably use discretionary enforcement and will not come full throttle after employers if they do bend the rules a bit. But they have not made any changes to the FSA rules, and there certainly is no guarantee. That's why documentation as to what you're doing and doing it on a fair and equal basis and potentially following the rules that the FMLA already has will help mitigate if the IRS does come back.
Gotcha. If employees receive a 10% pay cut, can they change their health and or dependent care FSA election mid-year?
Yes. One of the things that we've already talked about is the IRS has already specifically said on the FSA that they cannot make a mid-year change if they had a cost change or if they had a pay cut. As far as the DCAP is concerned, they never really addressed that either. But we do have the cost change as far as daycare or child care is concerned. So they can always, as we mentioned above, change the DCAP if the daycare is closed or that they've had a change of provider.
Okay. If an employee is furloughed and has an HSA plan, does the employer still contribute to the HSA account? The employee will not have a paycheck, so they will not be contributing. Will the employer put their contributions on hold too?
Okay. I'm glad someone asked a question on HSAs, and I want to go through both the employee and the employer just to make sure that we're all on the same page. All the rules on permitted election changes came out way before the eligibility, the ability to choose an HDH plan with an HS option was in existence. So that when it comes to permitted election changes, question arises, can an employee change the election amount on the HSA? And the IRS issued a notice, and it was 2004-50. I can't believe we're already back to 2004 when we got the high deductible plans, when they became a reality. And the IRS does allow a participant to prospectively change his or her election on a monthly basis, or more frequent, but not retroactively. So every pay period, technically, an employee can change the election amount. Therefore, there is a lot of flexibility with the HSA. The employer can also change their election amount as they can for any benefit, for any kind of business reason. However, I would always watch out for morale issues and looking out for that as well. But if there is a business reason and that they can't do it, then they can certainly do that. The other thing I would always advise is to look at the plan documents and see whether or not this is something that they would need to advise the employees ahead of time on.
I got it. And we had that one question that kind of came in late, Michelle, about the qualifying event. So if an employee is furloughed, does that constitute a qualifying event to change the medical plans or enroll spouses on the medical plan with the employer?
That is a very, very interesting question, and we have been discussing the furloughs as well as whether or not it's a qualifying event. One of the things that we have to always look at is the Affordable Care Act. And if this is an applicable large employer and they have 50 or more full-time, or including full-time equivalent employees, the very fact that they've had a reduction of hours might not have changed their employee status at all. They could still be considered full-time. For an example, if someone went through a measurement period and is now in a stability period, regardless of that reduction in hours of furlough, they are still an active employee, and under the IRS rules with the ACA, they are still entitled to benefits. So we always have to consider the IRS and the ACA when it comes to this. So therefore, it's not really a qualifying event because they still are entitled to benefits. However, in that Rule 2014, it was 55, the IRS did say that there would be a permitted election change if someone was in a stability period and then had a reduction of hours. The employer would still have to offer the benefits, and but if they wanted to, they could allow the employee to withdraw from the benefits at that point because they had a reduction of hours. There's a few cautionary tales to tell about that. Number one, if the employer does allow this permitted election change, they would have, and they use the W-2 method for affordability, coverage could be unaffordable because of the reduction of hours. And now with the permitted election change, if the individual goes to the marketplace and gets a subsidy, there could be a penalty associated with this employee. So you always want to watch out for that. And then another cautionary tale is that when the rule came out in 2014 that this was a permitted election change, we still have the individual mandate. The individual mandate for the penalty was reduced to 0, did not happen until 2019. So the IRS said that if you did allow the individual to withdraw from the plan, you had to ascertain that or you had to get assurances that by the second month they would actually have coverage elsewhere, either through a spousal plan or through the marketplace. The IRS said you had to, tell them that this is what they needed to do. You had to get reasonable assurances that they would do so, but you did not have to follow up. You were not supposed to be the watchdog and pounding on the table and beating the door and saying, hey, did you get coverage? So just to let you know, that is also out there. So it's not really a qualifying event under the ACA because coverage should be continuing. Now, what would be a qualifying event is that if they come to the end of the stability period and now they're on furlough and they're no longer in that period of time where the IRS considers them full-time and the benefits are terminated by operation of the plan. And at that stage of the game, that becomes a qualifying event.
Thank you, Michelle. I appreciate that very much. That is all of the questions that we have for today. Unless anyone has any final thoughts they wanted to submit through the chat feature, we will go ahead and wrap this section of the desktop discussions up. Thank you again so much for joining us today. Thank you for submitting your questions, and thank you mostly for your trust in MedCom Benefit Solutions. And Michelle Barkey, thank you so much for providing the answers and being so knowledgeable on a lot of these things that are incredibly confusing during this crazy time of COVID.
And Casey, thank you for setting all this up and being the moderator.
Oh, I love it. It's definitely a highlight of the day. So I like being here and connecting with other people, and connecting even virtually is a positive for us. So thank you guys so much. Once again, if you have other questions, please submit them to COVID-19 questions at medcombenefits.com. You can learn more if you follow us on LinkedIn. Check out our website and our blog. There's lots of information that we are posting every day there. So keep in touch with us, and we will do our best to answer your questions and keep in touch with you as well. Thank you again, and have a wonderful afternoon.